Well, it finally happened. I've overworked myself so much from work and editing all these videos that I caught myself a cold. But at least I got myself a new microphone! It's f***ing garbage! I just needed a new microphone super quickly so that I could get back to all this stuff. I might swap it out eventually if I have the cash. Doesn't matter though. Back on schedule. If this video comes out late, it's because I was way too sick to edit yesterday and I'm literally doing this 7 hours before it's supposed to come out. It's not the editing that I'm concerned about, it's the upload speed. God help me. Regardless, it's back to a full review at the moment, although I had actually planned on maybe swapping it out for just a smaller review, but the show must go on. Especially in the Prime Wars trilogy, the modus operandi of the Legends class has shifted from smaller versions of larger characters to G1-sized representations of small characters, where the Legends class scales with the larger figures, and I'm not the biggest fan of that. That being said, there have been some really good figures in this lineup, and as far as I can tell, we're almost done. I think this is why they're completely axing the Legends line for the War for Cybertron trilogy, and replacing it with the Micromasters. It makes sense. Besides, I'm sure there'll be more Legions at some point, and hey, third party definitely has you covered for your other small-scale characters and or whatnot. But one thing a lot of people don't get is that you can't just rush out a redesign of a character. You can't just remake it just like it was in G1 in 2 days. There's an art to it. You have to make sure you get it right. You have to change the transformation so it's interesting. You have to keep the G1 essence there, but bring something new to the table. What I'm trying to say is, you need effort. You cannot just shit out an inferior product. Greetings Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to Generation 1 Tailgate, and the 2 Legends figures that tried and failed to emulate it. You might think I'm cheating by including a Generation 1 figure in this Legion Legends lineup, but several places did list this as a Legion figure to appeal to the little kiddies. So anything's game, I guess. So quick timeline. Thrilling 30, we get the Tailgate that is repainted into Windcharger during Combiner Wars. Then Power of the Primes. We get a Windcharger that is inevitably repainted into Tailgate, and in my opinion for the better. Finally this year, Hasbro decides to reissue Bumblebee and 3 other mini-bots, to coincide with the upcoming Bumblebee movie. It's a rather decent film, by the way. And for some bizarre reason, he ends up at Cotton On in Australia. You know, the clothing store. People have complained that the Aussie release doesn't come with tech specs, and to them I politely tell them to f*** off. A sentiment that was clearly not dished out to the designers of the Thrilling 30 version. Out of all the toys I've discussed during this marathon, this would have to be the most boring. Quite simply, it's the most bare-bones effort at a car mode in both sculpt work, paint work, and originality. Overall, the design looks like they googled some images of Hot Wheels cars and said, yeah, let's just do that. At a Legion Legend scale, it could have worked, but on something this big, it just ends up putting me to sleep. The surface detail is basically non-existent as well. He has a few panel lines here and there, but when compared to the later version from Power of the Primes, it really doesn't hold up. I think the worst bit would have to be the paint though. They really cheaped out on this one. Thankfully you do get silver rims, despite the fact that there's no detail on there to make you enjoy it, but to cut costs they use the silver on the windows. As I've said on this show before, anytime Hasbro tries to cut costs by making the windows the same colour as a metallic part on the body, it blows up in their face. The blue flames on the front are also complete garbage. The shade of blue is garish and the flames themselves are incredibly messy. They look less like flames and more like unkept vines crawling up the bonnet. No, that is not a euphemism. And yet, with all the paint budget they managed to save, they didn't use a lick of it on the exhaust pipes at the back. First off, this thing looks incredibly ugly. Second, Games Workshop grey? Really, Hasbro? You couldn't pick a better shade? As discussed earlier, each Thrilling 30 Legends toy comes with a Minicon. In a cruel twist of fate, this guy ends up getting more paint than what was supposed to be the main attraction. I wouldn't call him good, but at the very least he has a certain charm to him that gets some sort of emotion out of me. Which I can't say for Tailgate. The alt mode is some sort of construction drone with no cockpit to speak of and obvious claw parts at the front. But even though this is really dumb, I still like it a lot. It's weird, it's wacky, it's got some lovely colours with some decent breakup and actual effort in the paint. I don't need to show the transformation in detail because it's basically a stand-up affair. However, even though this robot mode is quite bad, I still end up enjoying it. The red really makes the robot mode pop, and the scoop over the head combined with the tread arms brings back fond memories of classic Micromasters. Trust me, it's by no means good, but we've already discussed the worst Minicon of the line in this marathon, and clearly the only way is up. For a size comparison, he's about your average size. I wouldn't recommend putting him next to any other figures though, because it makes you realise how boring he is. The transformation on this guy is actually pretty piss poor. Well, not this guy's fine, as I've already shown, it's just a stand-up affair, but this guy is pretty pathetic. First thing you want to do is come under here, unpeg the legs from the inside, and they look incredibly weird and creepy. This entire section folds up. It'll tab into place a bit later. You take these two arms, fold them down, rotate the arms here, they will unpeg from the sides. Then you can take this entire section up here, fold it there, come around here, that part pegs into place, with these bits folding back. There's incredibly ugly kibble. Finally the feet fold down, and if you haven't already, make sure these are facing fully forward. And then you can sort of stand them up on these rather wibbly feet. And the robot mode is also not that great. Whoopee! T30 Tailgate goes hard into the IDW aesthetic, which at the time was the flavour of the month. Unfortunately, it lacks both the finesse and the parts count of a toy like Springer, Orion Pax, or Megatron. They tried so desperately to evoke the G1 nostalgia in vehicle mode, but not once did they consider that an alien form would have benefited them for the robot mode. Where to even begin? The first thing you'll probably notice is how lackluster the head is. It's accurate, but the detail is so washed out that the paint looks pre-faded, when actually it's just the colour they used. It's also locked in a permanent position, despite having a supposed neck swivel, and on some toys that can be okay, but in this case it's really detrimental. The chest is rather nice, but the arms are a complete joke. The shoulders are way too far out, and the contouring on them doesn't look natural at all. Then you get to the incredibly weak forearms. I've seen this transformation done on other toys before, again, in this marathon no less, but the way they've done it here makes him look like an amputee who's cobbled together some scrapped parts and pretended he's had arms. I do give praise to the legs, using the wheel mass quite well, but the waist section is actually my least favourite part of the figure. His hips are way too high up, and they have this huge metal strut sticking right down the middle of his pants like a giant... You know what, this figure isn't worth such a tasteless joke. Minicon weapon isn't that good either, it's a horrible mess of failed automorph and poor tolerances. I can see what they were going for, but regardless of which figure you use, it looks incredibly stupid. Oh, and to top it all off, this backpack is pathetic. Honestly, I can't think of anything I like about this robot mode, and even when I can, it's overshadowed by everything else. Articulation is as bare bones as you can get. Ball-jointed shoulders, elbows. On a side note, and I completely forgot about this, but unfortunately you can't really get it out because there's some sculpting in the way there. So the bicep swivel doesn't really work unless you really try to cheat it. That doesn't work. Hips and knees. The feet also rotate, but getting this guy into a dynamic pose is near impossible anyway, so just give up. The Make Toys version is looking pretty appetizing right now. A few years passed and Hasbro thought they'd take another attempt at the old Minipot, starting with the other mold mate this time. This time it's a much more straight-faced approach, but at least it counts as better. The sculpted detail is at the very least passable. The car design is sleek and sexy, and the paint is rather well done. You get a healthy dose of black along the windows, and all of them are painted this time, which doesn't always happen on a Legends toy. You also get some paint on the front and the rear bumpers. Granted, the rear is just the thighs, but the thighs themselves have a metallic coat on it, so the colour breakup is better than nothing. There's also some white colour correction on the roof, but it doesn't stick out from the plastic too much. There isn't really much to complain about this vehicle. I suppose I could comment on the weird fact that the front wheels are pinned whilst the back ones are clipped, but in the grand scheme of things it's not too bad. Much like Titan's Return Wheelie, this version of Tailgate supports an opening roof, allowing you to fit a Titan Master or, more accurately to the line, a Prime Master inside. Yes, the doors don't open, but I don't think it's that big of an issue. Size-wise, it's actually pretty big for a Legends figure. In fact, it's almost Scout-sized. Okay, so if you ever transformed a Legends car former before, well, you probably know how this works already. First thing you ought to do is make sure there are no Titan Masters hidden in there. Out you come, and away you go. And then if it's already closed, well, at that point you actually already open it again, so that was completely redundant. You basically turn this around, these bits come around and fold into the legs. Another real shame is that you can't turn the head around for the head reveal, it just is kind of stuck facing forward. Not that it matters. You bring down the arms by first unpicking the hood, and then these just come down, and you'll notice this entire section here also folds down. This folds down. You need to make sure this part is fully down. It's on a double hinge there. Everything kind of folds down. Everything folds down. Double hinge here, also double hinge here. And eventually you get it lined up so that that pegs into the back. And from there, the arms just bend a bit, I guess. And you have a decent tailgate. It's not terrible. It's quite alright. At the very least, Power of the Prime's tailgate looks better. The proportions are nice, the paint is solid, he's got a nice chunky aesthetic, and he doesn't have a shit ton of kibble hanging off every single part of his body. That said, he's a little underwhelming. In fact, I go as far as to say that the vehicle mode is the highlight of the figure, because what we have here is just fine. Not great, not terrible. Right off the bat, this is a lovely head sculpt. It's using all sorts of G1 vibes on the serious end of the spectrum, kind of where people would gush over fans' toys and claim they're better than Takara. Quakewave doesn't count. The reuse of the back windows as colour breakup on the legs is fantastic. If they hadn't done this, it would have been a sea of white, so this is greatly appreciated. And yes, technically the arms do have window kibble on them, but personally I don't mind it. In terms of kibble, this is pretty low key, and it doesn't stop any posing power on the arms. What is pretty bad in terms of kibble would have to be the backpack. This is just ridiculous. I don't usually care about backpacks that much, but when it's to this extent I can't help but feel annoyed. It gives similar vibes to a Ninja Turtle, and not in a good way. They could have had this fold away into the torso, but no, apparently a Prime Master gimmick is way more important. The biggest flaw I have, though, is the articulation. Fortunately, the head rotates this time, which does wonders for the design. The shoulders have hinges and ball joints, and the elbows are ball jointed too. Unfortunately, the legs aren't great. He does have ball joints at the hips, but for some inexplicable reason, he has no thigh swivel. It's not because they can't put them in there, the plastic is strong enough. It's not because the transformation is too complex, it's quite simple. It's because they wasted the parts count on the stupid Prime Master gimmick, and because of that, we're stuck without properly articulated legs. At least he gets knees. Yay! Size-wise, he is again quite large for a Legends figure. The height isn't that crazy, but he is incredibly chunky. In a strange twist of fate, the oldest toy is also the newest toy, because G1 reissues only came out in Australia a month or two ago. Regardless, the original Tailgate transformed into a toyetic car that uses the genius idea of having plastic breakup to facilitate the window paint, as opposed to just painting it on. The result is a killer car mode with some sweet chrome details on the front and the rims, even if the proportions make him seem more akin to a dune buggy than a car. Sadly, when you look at the underside, you notice that the chrome chips off incredibly easily, but most of those chips get hidden in robot mode, and this is primarily my fault for taking him to work to write this script in my lunch hour. Other features include incredibly satisfying rolling, thanks to the magic of pinned wheels, and a rub symbol which works far better than a certain maniacal leader whom I discussed earlier in the lineup, and that's a lot really. There's not a lot this figure has going for it in vehicle mode, but what it does well. Due to the compact nature, I'd even say that it's more fun than the Power of the Primes version, as it's not overly bloated to fit the Prime Master. It's small, it's fun, and it's easy to transform. Transformation for this guy is so small even a monkey could do it. It's just flip out the legs, and undo the arms, and pull them out, and you're done. But that's G1 for you. It's simple, but it's... do I say effective? Come on, stand up, come on, stand up, come on, stand up. Oh, God damn it. That's the one thing I really have an issue with this on this figure. It just does not want to stand up. Maybe if I move the arms forward a bit? No. Just will not stand up. Can you please stand up? Ah! Okay, I give up. I'll just have to figure something else out. But yeah, this just transforms. Hooray! There we go, I grabbed the nearest DVD I could find from the old Blockbuster, and hey, it stands! It's just on my surface, it doesn't really. Hooray! By all accounts, I should really hate this figure. He goes against everything I enjoy in a Transformer under normal circumstances. He lacks any and all articulation, only having shoulder swivels and knee hinges. His proportions are an utter joke. His head is way too big in comparison to the rest of his body. The lack of proper heel spurs make this figure a nightmare to stand up. In spite of all this, he might be the best of the three? Possibly? Okay, so I know you're all scratching your heads right now, but allow me to explain. What you need to consider is how these figures effectively carry out the intent of the size class. When you compare Thrilling 30's Tailgate to other Legends figures at the time, particularly ones like Cosmos, you realise they f***ed up royally. Even next to Shrapnel, there's no contest. Then you take Power of the Prime's Tailgate, he's alright, but he's missing a lot of necessary elements that make up a Transformer of this size class, and compared to other figures like Slash and Battletrap, you can tell that less effort was allocated into his design. He's just a fill-in so that fans can have a G1 or Chug-styled version on the shelf without having to worry about using the Thrilling 30 one as a stand-in. But the G1 version, it's just trying to be a fun toy during the 80s, and for the time, he's a very fun toy. Out of all the 4 G1 reissues released, he might actually be the best. He's just fun. Transforming him is a breeze, and both modes make you feel a sense of childlike wonder. I have no nostalgia for this thing, but it has made me quite happy anyway. As a self-proclaimed Legends connoisseur, it's highly possible that the fun from this figure comes from the failure of the other two, but even then he's a decent figure on his own, and a nice purchase if you want to throw back to a simpler time. I really don't like this toy. It takes a really cool character and a really cool design, and just doesn't give it the attention it deserves. You might think, oh, it's just a Legends figure, you don't need to be so harsh on it, and I have used that argument for several toys in the past marathon, but at some point you just have to give up and admit that it's just not that good a toy. In fact, I'd even say that the Minicon it comes with outclasses the toy itself, because this thing has so little effort put into it. Not that the power of the prize version fares much better, it is so close to being a 2, but it just barely gets past because it's got solid construction and decent paintwork. Plus the alt mode's pretty fun, even if it is a bit oversized. The problem comes from this bloody stupid gimmick. If this wasn't included, they could have done much more. But alas, it was forced into the worst of the 3 Prime Wars lines, and some things had to be sacrificed. So at the end of the day, Tailgate just proves to be the most fun. It's not that he's better than the others, because by modern standards they would technically be better, but the fun factor is so much higher on this figure. If it was simply by default, I recommend those two, but those two just fail at what they're trying to do, whereas this succeeds. And again, I must reiterate, this is not nostalgia, because I didn't grow up with Generation 1 figures, I grew up with the first movie. I understand that for Legends collectors and Chug collectors, those other toys may be more appealing, but if you're just collecting toys on their own like I am, you really can't go wrong with this. Besides, it's only 15-20 bucks. Or it was before it sold out. Although selling out is actually a pretty good thing, because many people are saying, oh, these won't sell because G1 collectors don't get these tech specs, therefore they won't buy it, but a lot of people did end up buying it, and it proves to Hasbro that there is a market for this, especially considering they had to remake most of the mold parts because of mold degradation. Did I say degradation in previous videos? I am an idiot. And of course, we're getting an Astro Train later down the line thanks to fan voting, which I am very happy about, and I'll probably grab that one. Might even grab myself a Devastator if it comes cheap at some point. Or I might get a second-hand Devastator, who knows? Yes, I actually like Generation 1 toys, despite the fact that I never grew up with them. They have their own charm to them. Don't ever forget that. And that concludes the Hashtag portion of this Legendary Marathon. Tomorrow we're moving into third party, and it will stay that way until this marathon is over. And where better to start than where third-party Legends first hit their stride? If you're gonna start with third-party Legends, you gotta start with Iron Factory, because without them, we wouldn't be where we are today.